My name's Tony McMillen, and I make books and comic books and stuff. I'm an artist and a writer and a colorist and a letterer, sort of. And in general, I like to make up stuff. And the book I'm working on now is called Serious Creatures. Serious Creatures is the story of Bobby Feckle, who at age 14 wanders onto a movie set and meets a special effects artist named Jack Barber. And Bobby has his drawing portfolio with him, basically. He shows the guy some sketches, and Jack Barber starts a correspondence with him, and pretty soon Bobby starts working in the movie industry with Jack at age 14. And even though that sounds outrageous and kind of just like a fantasy, it happened more than once to a couple different guys who became some of the biggest special effects artists in the industry. And chiefly Rob Bottin. Rob Bottin's the guy who did the special effects for The Thing. He did Legend, RoboCop, The Howling, a bunch of great films, and really innovative and distinct kind of style with the special effects. And Rob Bottin, he started, working at age 14 as Rick Baker's assistant, and until eventually, I believe he finished The Thing right before he turned 22, I believe, or 21. So he was, and The Thing is probably considered is easily considered his magnum opus. And he was, he could barely buy a legal drink nowadays. Knowing that stuff, hearing about that stuff growing up, of course your mind races to what if that was me, or just how insane would that be to be that young, and to not only be doing what you want to do with your life already, following your dream, but to be at that high level. You're working on $1 million movies and multi-million-dollar movies, and there's a lot of pressure, I'm sure, on you to perform and get it right. But still, even though all that possible tension, it still seems like it would be such a blast, especially when this is happening with the movie industry of the late 70s and early 80s to the 90s. So eventually I started thinking about how special effects, in a way, that would be a great window into the movie industry changing into the blockbuster phenomenon. So basically you have the 70s auteur thing, and then Jaws happens, and then Star Wars happens, and Close Encounters, and all of a sudden the landscapes change, and these big movies, which are bigger than any movies that have ever been before, as far as money making and as far as hitting an audience instantly, they all kind of rise at the same time, and special effects play a big part of that. So of course, a front row seat would be the special effects makers themselves, and a really interesting front row seat would be a teenager who is in the middle of this. And so the book, it's not Rob Bottin's life. I don't know Rob Bottin. I don't know his life details. I do know his career. I know the trajectory of his career. And so I married his career arc, which I think is really perfect, and it has a natural kind of narrative flow to it. I married that with some of my own personal details, my own growing up, some stuff like that, and of course some utter fiction and total bullshit. So it's I've said this before about Nefarious Twit, which had some autobiographical stuff about me in there. It's like my Purple Rain. Like Prince took a few little things from his life, but then also exaggerated and expounded on a bunch of stuff, and also made up a bunch of stuff. So it's not my story. It's not Rob Bottin's story. It's not total fiction, but all three of those things kind of smushed together become sort of what Serious Creatures is about. And so Serious Creatures is a comic book series, and the idea is I'm on issue. I just finished issue 4. I'm working on issue 5. There'll be 6 issues, and then I'm gonna take a break probably for like a year because it's pretty time consuming, and then I'll do 6 more issues, and that will be the complete story. And issue 6 is kind of a perfect little dividing mark. It's if this was a TV series, it'd be the good end of the season, you know. So the first half is called Never Been to California. The second half will be called Now Leaving the Golden State. And this first half, we're following Bobby from age 14 in 1974 all the way through until 1980, and kind of basically his career is he's been the partner and apprentice of Jack Barber, and he's at the end of issues 5 and 6. He's kind of at the crux of do I go out and do my own thing? Do I continue to work with Jack? What do I want to do if I do my own thing? What would I do differently? What can make my my work distinctly mine? And so one of the things about one of the fun things for me is I view stories a lot of times as different types of stories, not just genres, but kind of even sub that. Like I love like the story. I love the stories where it's like people stuck in a room or building. And they have to board up the walls and make sure the monsters or the gang members or the terrorists or whatever don't get them. I love that kind of thing. You know, Return of the Living Dead, Assault on Precinct 13. You know, stuff like that. That's a particular type of story that I really almost always kind of get something out of that story. And so I got to do a version of that with my novel, An Augmented Fourth, where my characters were stuck in a kitchen inside an abandoned hotel, and you know they had to board up the walls and do all that kind of stuff. And there's always it's fun tropes to play with, and I just kind of dig that that formula. So this story, Serious Creatures, is more of the Goodfellas, Boogie Nights kind of rise and fall of not only a person in their career, but also an entire industry, you know. And so like I think that the special effects industry obviously been around for a while, but in the mid 70s it hit this new peak with practical effects being really innovative, and they could do some crazy stuff with animatronics. And then you have eventually Change-O and these kind of effects where it looks like someone's skin is bubbling or augmenting it and changing and distorting. So that carried through, and then you have like this golden decade through the 80s, and then the early 90s, all of a sudden, with computer-generated images and CGI, you have James Cameron and Spielberg and then Lucas and all these people developing a new language, and all of a sudden practical effects was no longer the top dog, and they kind of fell down and fell by the wayside. And of course, some of the guys who do those effects, they are at the top of the heap for a while, you know, and some of them, you know, pivoted and they start working with computer effects, or they became straight up computer effects animators themselves. And some of them, like Rob Bottin, just disappeared. And no one knows if he quit particularly for that reason. It seems pretty likely that was part of the reason why he stopped doing stuff. But it must be, as a creator and an artist, I'm putting my head through the imagining of my entire industry sort of just kind of falling into the ocean. And not that there's still practical effects and some really great ones, but they're no longer thought of as the first solution or the top most cutting edge thing you can do. Which is of course a big shame, because I think practical effects almost always win out for what looks best on film. There's some things you do with CGI that I think should be CGI, background stuff, and Forrest Gump meeting the fucking president or whatever. That of course that makes sense, but character work, actually, I think having appliances on an actor almost always look better, and I think actors respond better when it's on film, when it's practical. And so, Rick Baker obviously retired just recently, and he cited like he was just getting sick. I mean, he's getting older, so I'm sure he's just sick of the grind no matter what. But he's also sick of doing a bunch of work and then, preliminary work, and then they go, oh, we're just going to CGI this and that, or them not listening to him, or just the CGI guys getting the jobs that he thought should have been his. So that was on my mind recently too, while making the comic book. Really good about doing this comic book because I feel like it should be a comic book. It's made to be a comic book, and I think that shows in the pages. I think that's the best thing you do with anything you're making, any sort of art, is make it a choice that you chose to make this in this medium because this story that you're creating works best in this medium. So, like for example, my first few attempts at a novel, and even one of my completed novels, which I've never published, they were sort of they were like a runner-up. I wanted them to be screenplays. I wanted them to be movies. That was one of my first loves, is I wanted to make movies. And so, reading them, there's some good stuff in them here and there, but I can tell at least that they don't sit comfortably in their own skin. They don't utilize the tricks of their medium the way they should. They don't capitalize on what they are. So basically they're screenplays who have been kind of smushed into the slot of a novel, and so they read like that. I think that's why they're not good. And even Nefarious Twit, my first novel, eventually I figured out the voice it should have to be a novel, but it was always going to be a novel, but I kept thinking of it in cinematic terms, and so there's some, that lends itself to being really visual, but also it took me a while to get to a draft where I was like, okay, this has to be a novel in order to tell the story this way. So building on that, I've completed this trilogy of novels called the Bleeding Tree trilogy, and it's this folk rock, fantasy, western, fucking craziness. And it's my favorite thing I've done, unless Serious Creatures beats it. We'll see. I'm not done with it yet. But Bleeding Tree is done. And Bleeding Tree, I was struggling for years to figure out how to do this thing. And building on Nefarious Twit and figuring out that I need to make things, if they're going to be novels, there should be a reason why they're novels. The way I tell them should be in a way that only a novel can tell it the best way. So building on that, my next novel, An Augmented Fourth, that I lean to a first-person POV, and when I inhabited the character of Cadra Burton, our main character there, I realized, okay, this is exactly what I was trying to do with Twit. I need a strong voice and a strong reason that this is a novel, not a movie, not a screenplay, not a comic book, not a play. This is a novel, and that first-person voice really helped me figure out how to do that. So, building on what I learned from that, I went back to the Bleeding Tree trilogy, finished it in a first-person POV, and found a distinct voice, and all of a sudden it started rolling out of me. I was like, this is how this story should be told. Now, doing that, I did my first comic book, Lumen, all on my own. And, because I've done a comic book before where I was just a writer, and, I learned a lot of things, but also drawing it, you learn so much more. It's just all you. So Lumen is really driven by art first, and so it's like, what do I want to draw? What's the style? What's the vibe I'm trying to get here across? What would be cool to draw? And then the story kind of works itself in around that, and so it had to be a comic book. Lumen is visuals. Lumen is art. Lumen is it's all about the look and kind of conveying that message through a visual medium. And then not just, comic books aren't just art though either. They're not just drawings. Obviously you have panels, you have structure, you have pacing, you have narrative things you can do in comic books you can't do with other things. For instance, in Lumen, issue 3, there's a sequence where the main character, Esteban, he is going after a little bulb of lumen, which is a little bright, little bioluminescent energy source, and he goes to reach for it, and he falls off a cliff. And so the comic book, you see that panel when he falls, you turn it, and all of a sudden you hit to flip the comic, and then you have these 2-page spreads of him falling through the darkness. And so it's all dark, and so you flip the page, and he's falling some more. It's almost like animation, because he moves a little bit, he goes a little further down, and all of a sudden on the bottom of the page, you start seeing some light. And the light gets bigger and bigger as the pages go on, and all of a sudden you see it's an eyeball, and then you see this big giant maw, you see this giant anglerfish looking monster that's waiting for him. And so now as you're reading the comic and you flip these double page spreads, which are turned up this way, he's falling closer and closer to it, and all of a sudden it closes in on him. And then the light goes away because the creature shuts its eyes, and there's 2 spreads of this darkness, there's nothing, and then there's a little bit of light, and then there's a huge burst of color when Esteban rips through the creature's eyeball and escapes. And so I can only do that kind of thing in a comic book. Animation, you can maybe do something similar, but it won't be the same. So learning from Lumen, and basically all these lessons from all these books are basically make this story in the medium that best tells it. So, Serious Creatures initially was based on a short story I wrote called The Malfunctioning Werewolf, and then I decided to make that feature length, make it a full novel. And I wrote a chapter of it. I was like, this is not working. This is not like Bleeding Tree. This is not like Augmented Force. It's not flowing right. It doesn't seem right. And I kept thinking about how I wanted it to be surreal. I wanted to really get inside the characters' heads and show the world kind of manifesting some of their emotions and thoughts and have it affecting the world. And I was like, I'm not a good enough writer, or it's just too cumbersome to kind of fit into this really fun story. There's a lot of comedy in it. So I was like, how do I do that? I was like, if I could do it in a comic book, it would work. And so I did a couple pages. I tried converting that chapter and then building on the chapter I wrote as prose into a comic book, and it started singing. It started like, this is exactly how I need to tell it. And I realized all of a sudden that it has to be a comic book, and that was a great feeling. It was a great feeling because, like, before I've struggled with novels trying to get the voice, trying to get the POV right, and I've written whole drafts and realized that it's all for nothing. It's all shit. So I need to go back and redo it. And Serious Creatures, I think I figured it out early on, and it's worked since. So I'm having a blast. I'm having a ball making this comic book. One thing that's a big difference from my last comic book is the coloring in this. I'm still using digital coloring, but like Lumen, I was trying to make it look not digital, and so now I think I got a lot closer to that. And part of the way I've done that is I use brushes that are either they're basic crayon brushes or other dry media that sort of looks like crayon, or watercolor brushes. And I use a few other little tricks here and there, and I use like Ben-Day dots and halftones and stuff like that. But watercolor and crayon is kind of the main thing, and so that's a big direct inspiration is Michel Fiffe and his work in Cobra and Zegas and basically all his stuff. He's got a really cool, vivid sense of color that has that sometimes crayon and watercolor textures that are kind of sprinkled throughout. And the other big color influence is Tom Scioli, who, especially his Transformers G.I. Joe. There's a lot of crayon work in there and other things like that, which it just gives it this really different vibe. And my artwork, my ink style is really it's really messy and loose and sometimes kind of dark, and it can be really gritty. And so in a weird balance with the crayon and the watercolor, it sort of, I don't know if it softens it up, but it definitely kind of fills in the void. So now it can be more playful at times, and also just kind of gives it a cool psychedelic kind of sheen to it, which I always kind of respond to. It looks like what I've always wanted to go for is like a rainbow oil slick. It's like sturdy and greasy, but it's still colorful and beautiful. And that's what I'm trying to do. So those two guys, especially with coloring, have been a big influence in this book. And my influences are always, there's always a foundation art-wise. Frank Miller stuff, and Eric Larson too, and Sam Keith, and early on there's still some Tom McFarlane in there, but newer stuff is in there too. I keep picking up, and Scioli and Fife are the biggest ones probably, but there's a lot of stuff in there, and I think for this book some outside comic book stuff. Basil Gogos, who's an artist who did a bunch of and most people's favorite Famous Monsters magazine covers. He is a painter, and he's known for these really psychedelic coloring on monsters and weird horror images. So it makes it kind of fun and kooky, even though it's spooky and scary. And so this issue 1 of Serious Creatures, the cover is directly homage to his style and just his approach. And so I've always liked his stuff. I didn't know his name. I kept seeing it, and I was like, I should figure out who this guy is, and so I figured it out. It's a big influence. Jeffrey Allen Love, who I still am a big fan of, and he was an influence on Lumen too, but he's still in there. He's in the mix. If you haven't read his book, Notes from the Shadowed City, is a wonderful illustrated book, and he's doing comic book work as well, and he's an all-around great artist. He works a lot in silhouettes, and he's just really a breath of fresh air. I really like his stuff. And there's all kinds of people in there, and also non-artists. I am influenced by some of the movies that I'm doing analogs for and homages to and rip-offs of, and looking at some special effects for like The Howling or American Werewolf, trying to nail that exaggeration on a mold or a face or whatever. That's been fun, and trying to figure out how to do that in my style. My style is already so stylized and exaggerated and not normal looking that it's hard to sell like something that looks even that's a special effect that's supposed to be like a grotesque person or something like that. Everyone looks kind of grotesque the way I draw them, so I've had to kind of think a lot about how to sell this as a special effect, not just someone's weird face that I draw. I just did an issue where the movie in our book is called Ice Cream, The Body Electric. It's basically an analog for the real film Altered States, which is a really trippy film, and there's amazing effects there by Dick Smith. And I had a ball drawing it, and it's crazy. And I think I get across in the page that this isn't just my usual weird look on things. This is like next level special effects. This is like the start of Change-O and the inflated air bladders underneath false skin that gives the illusion of someone's hand swelling up or someone's face turning into a werewolf's face because it's actually a false skin or false face, and you have a balloon underneath this rubber skin that's kind of expanding. So we'll see, I guess. I sell online to people, and I get subscribers, and they're loyal. People from Lumen have come back to this one. People have read my novels that come to these ones, and that feels great. But I just want to get the book out there to more and more people. And I love the work of a traditional publisher just to get a bigger audience. But if that's not the case, I still got to find more people. So I'm always looking for new opportunities and like new ways to hustle and basically get beyond my little inner circle here of people on Facebook and social media and crap like that. Because it's getting harder and harder, I think, for creators to reach audiences through those channels because of algorithms and other assorted bullshit. So I'm looking into it. So hopefully the next step will be even more people getting into the book. So yeah, eventually, hopefully in 3 months' time, I'll have issues 5 and 6 done, and then I'll have a collection of the first 6 issues, and I'll be doing some more shows, and hopefully I'll find a way to kind of get a bigger platform for more and more folks to get into the book. Because the book it's pretty fucking good, man. I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm just saying something.